Copyright in these lectures is either owned by the ANU or a third party who has licensed the ANU to use it. Students may use the recording for personal study only. No lecture may be communicated online, copied or shared without the prior permission of the ANU.
The importance of endogenous interactions on corporate investment choice. The interactions can improve the qualities of management and thereby improve the investment opportunities. Moreover, it always brings the endogenous people-based explanation for the exogenous geographic and political explanation. The next part, I will introduce the methodologies of this paper. Let me begin with the example. Kmart is a Detroit-based company and Target is mini-price-based companies. We want to focus on what factor influence the investment rates of these two companies. The one factor we focus on is the non-local retailer companies such as Walmart. The second factor we want to focus is the non-retailer local company such as the Detroit-based Ford Motor companies and mini-appliance-based company General Mills. I want to give more explanations of the second factor. Let's suppose that in 1997 is a good year for the retailers in the U.S. and all retail's investment rates increased by 10%. Moreover, the Ford Motor companies increased their investment rates by 0%, and the General Mills company increased their investment rates by 20%. In this situation, our parametric estimates that the target investment rate should be double compared to the Kmart investment rate. Next, I want to extend the benchmark result. The firm investment is always related to the average Q and cash flows of their neighbors in different industries. The later result is noteworthy for two reasons. The first one is the local cash flow is always double compared to their own cash flow. The second one is the result contributes to the debate on whether investment cash flow sensitive are more likely to reflect the financial constraints or growth opportunities. Our paper suggests the later ones growth opportunities. The ideal laboratory of identifying local spillovers is below. Firstly, we use the investment rates of firms outside the city as an instrument to extend the shock to firms in the dominant industry. And the next step is we want to look at the investment rates of other firms in the city. The paper always has some other analysis. The first one is it ruled out the fluctuations in real estate price. The other one is the paper is related to previous work. The next part, I want to introduce the motivations of the endogenous local effect. So, what is endogenous local effect? It is not because a systematic exogenous factor, but rather because endogenous choice of local firms influence each other. There are also a few types of local endogenous interaction. The first one is skills or knowledge spillover. The second one is consumption externalities. The third one is infrastructure. The fourth one is collateral values. The last one is herding. My part is finished. Let me welcome my partner to introduce the next part.
And I will introduce the data selection and model construction. Firstly, let's look at the data. Firstly, we identify all public listed firms in New York Stock Exchange NASDAQ and American Stock Exchange from January 1970 and to December 2009. And we collect monthly stock return and yearly fundamental data and industry codes. After that, we visualize all fundamentals at the 1% level. What does it mean, the 1% level? It means that we exclude the samples from the 1% tiles of the distribution. And then look at the variable construction here. There are two classifications. The first one is by Pharma Branch 12 industry category. Each firm is classified by industry. And the second one is that according to the firm headquarters, we group them into one of the 20 largest economic areas. Now let's look at this table. This table shows a themes of distribution of firms and EA in our data sets. The first finding is that those area with more population hosts more firms, but there is an absolute outlier is the Detroit here. It ranked the S in population, but there are only 69 firms here on average during the period we focus on. And the second result here is that many areas has a dominant industry, but those regions rich in technology and energy have high rankings based on the sign. Now let's look at this table. Three numbers. Those numbers indicate that some regions have their dominant industry, but our finding is that geographical features plays a reduced role in the clusters. Instead, information spillover play a much more important role. Now let's look at the portfolio statistics. Let's look at these two pictures. Each point in the panel 1 means that represent one of the 12 industry in the Pharma Branch 12 industry category. And the second one here, every point is one of the 20 EAs. We can see that these two pictures show a similar trait, but the second one, those points are more widespread. It tells us that investment rates are more dispersed across areas. Now let's look at the second table. This table tells us that a relationship in a portfolio has a similar trend than that in different portfolio. What does it mean? Let me take an example. Let's look at the first number, minus 0.5. It means that in the same industry, different area, a firm's cash flow and its Q have a negative correlation of minus 0.5. And another finding is here. It means that the firms in the same industry, different area, has a cash flow, and then the firm in different industry and the same area has a Q. Those two variable has a negative 0.3 correlation, which is very similar than the above correlation. This results foreshare the multivariate regression we conduct in the following parts. Now, next part is about our model. There are two models. The first model aims to test whether a firm's investor expenditure are related to the expenditure of its neighbor firms. And the second one is that is to test whether a firm's investment expenditure is related to the investment prospects of the firms nearby. before we come to the model, let me introduce a very important notation here. The J represents an individual firm and T is the time period. And I is one of the 12 industry where the firm operates. And the A is one of the 20 years where a firm J's headquarters is located. This notation will appear again and again in our model. Let's look at the model. This formula here tells us how to calculate the investment. Firm J's investment work as the dependent variable, and these three components work as the independent variable. Let's look at the first one. The first one means that firms in different areas and the same industry. It indicates industry effects. And the second component here means firms in the same area and different industry, which is the local effects. This component is what we are most interested in. And the last part here, it means firms in the same industry and area, but exclude firm J. This is an interaction firm. Now let's turn to the second model. These two formulas here tell us how to calculate Q and cash flow. This formula here seems more complicated than the first one, but they have similar idea. We replace the neighbor firms investment expenditure with Q and cash flow. But please pay attention to this part. In this model, we include the firm itself's Q and cash flow into our model because these two factors are likely to influence a firm's investment expenditure. So please pay attention to this part. P here, P means the portfolio level and J means the firm level. Now my partner will introduce the analysis result.
Now we come to the result analysis part. And this model shows the result for the investment and investment regressions. The first column shows the investment expenditures with the average investment rates for the firms in its industry, which is the industry effects. The second column shows the estimates of the different industry with same area portfolios, which is the local effects. And we can see the estimates of the 0.186 indicates that the investment sensitivity is about local effects is about 1/3 of the industry effect. And the third column include both. We can see that coefficient about the local effects is increased to 0.231, which is half of the industry portfolios, which is 0.508. And the first column includes the firm's industry and headquarters nearby, and because the regression already includes the industry and the area counterparts, we can think this about interaction term of the industry and the area. And we can see that the industry portfolios decreased to 0.386, which is identically the sum of the two local effects. And the last two columns indicate the at the 1 year lag and the 2 year lags. And we can see that for the non-local industry portfolio, only the contemporaneous value matters, but the lagged values are insignificant and negative, and which is very small, indicates that whatever information about investments for the opportunities is reflected by the firms in the same industry, the different area incorporated into its own investment opportunities is very quickly. And the lagged values are most significant coefficients, and therefore we can conclude that although the majority of the local effects are immediately reflected in investment plans, the full effect of the regional vibrancy takes longer to emerge. And then we can come to the second model, the investment Q regressions. In the first columns, it only includes the firms on Q and the cash flows have with the scale by lakhs. And we can see the cash flow and Qs are significant, which include that they are the most important determinants of the investment rates. And the second columns have the industry effects, which is the statistically weaker than the on-firm's investment rate. And the next, third columns, we can see that the coefficients are both significant on the cash flows, but the Q of the local effects is not significant, which indicates that they are weaker than the other variables that are not very significant. And the next fourth columns includes that industry effects, local effects, and the interaction terms, which is both Q and cash flows indicates that significant, shows cash flows for variables are important, but in the same industry and same area is not significant. And for the last columns, it add 1 year lags and the 2 year lags. We found that the 2 year lag is never significant when we add the 1 year lag into the regression model. And on the other hand, the cash flows in fluctuation appear to influence not only current but also the futures investment. And in the previous literatures, there is a long debate about why a firm's own cash flows so strongly predict investment. The first statement is that financial constraint. When firms faces frictions to external finance, they tend to rely on internally generated cash flow to fund investments. And the second is that cash flows provide information about the investment opportunities. Firm stocks price may not be sufficient to reflect the investment prospects. Therefore, the cash flow could be another fundamental to explain the investment. From the table before, we can see that the financial constraints for the firms are unlikely to be related to the cash flows of the nearby firms without strong industry links. Similarly, even controlling for the firm's own cash flows and the Q profitability and the industry's level is an important determinant of the investment. So we can conclude that the regression results provide support for the second statement that cash flow can provide information on investment opportunities. Now let my partner to introduce the next part.
Hi, so I'll talk about some of the identification tests that the authors used to identify why cities in the same city invest together. So previously we have been talking about that the local co-movement in investment is caused by the urban vibrancy or the local endogenous interaction. However, there might be still other possible explanations for the local co-movement in investment. These are the examples, which are the exogenous area shocks, the differential macro sensitivities, and also the real estate values and the collateral channel. So for the first one, exogenous area shocks can generate the correlation in the local firms' investment without requiring any interaction among firms. For example, like Hurricane Katrina will cause all local firms to decrease their investment, but this doesn't involve any firm-to-firm interaction. So to rule out this possibility, the authors start with identifying areas where a single local dominant industry exists. So in the 20 EAs, there are four cities where the authors identified to have a single dominant industry. Then the authors used the industry level fluctuations in the local dominant industry as the local vibrancy by regressing the expenditures of firms that are not in the local dominant industry on the equal weighted average investment for portfolio of local firms in the area's dominant industry as the X variable. So the result is presented as in the next page. So as we can see, after controlling for the industry effects, the local dominant industry portfolio seems to have a positive and significant effect on the firm's investment. And the effects still remain positive and significant even when we aggregate all these four effects and average them, and also when we subdivide the sample into small and big firms. However, one might still argue that these time-varying locations will affect the local's area dominant industry and the firms that are in the same area but not in the dominant industry at the same time, just like the hurricane. So what the authors did to further rule out this possibility is by replacing each of the four local dominant industry portfolios before with the economy-wide portfolios that only include firms of the same industry but outside of the EAs. So that the lack of and we can see the result is still remain the same, essentially. All are still positive and significant. These are the area effects. So the lack of the local variables on the right-hand side of the regression suggests that it is impossible that the time-varying area shocks is driving the result, which is the local movement in investment in the previous part. For the second one, because our benchmark regression essentially put in a year-fixed effects, and this means that we assume similar macro sensitivities for all the 20 EAs, but in general, cities will have different macro sensitivities, and this assumption might lead to this possible wrong significant result as by using where we have some cities that have very large or very small macro sensitivities. Their deviation from the average macro sensitivities will be washed into the effect of the coefficient, the area effect coefficient that we estimate, which is the beta 2, and this might lead to a possible wrong significant result. So to check on this, the authors further run the regression before and the market investment on investment regression on each of the 20 EAs and extract the estimate for beta 2, which is the area coefficient, and alpha 1, which is the market sensitivity coefficient. And the result is presented in the next page. So for this graph, we should focus on those cities which have very large or very small market investment coefficient, which is to the right or to the left of this graph. And as we can see to the right of this graph, like for example, these are the cities with very large market sensitivities like Denver, Phoenix, and San Francisco. However, we can see from the graph that their area investment coefficient are actually below the overall average area coefficient. So, except Orlando. And for those cities with very small market sensitivities like Indianapolis and St. Louis, the average of their area investment coefficient are actually also below the overall average area investment coefficient. So, this suggests that the area coefficient that we estimated before should be capturing more than just the differential area sensitivities to macro shocks. Another way to address this concern is by just modifying the regression model and allowing different regions having different macro sensitivities. This can be done by removing the year fixed effects and introducing interaction terms of the area times market fixed effects. So by changing the regression model, the results of column 4 in the table 3 still remain essentially the same. The coefficients on the same area, different industry, and same area, same industry is still the same. So, but however, there might be still some potential concern with the regression model. That is, cities might still have different global sensitivities, because previously we talked about the US market sensitivities. So, for example, New York, Chicago, and LA, they have a lot of foreign firms in these cities. And also San Diego and Seattle are located near international borders. So these cities might be very sensitive to foreign exchange rate, for example. So the point is that one can still argue that in the table 5, the Houston non-energy firms have different global sensitivities, which leads to the result of local movement in investment in Houston. But it seems unlikely that this sensitivity would vary systematically with fluctuations in the energy industry, which is the dominant industry in Houston, other than through the interaction among the firms in Houston. And also, it is unlikely that this relationship would hold independently for the other 3 cities that we have mentioned before that have the single local dominant industry. So for the last one, it's about the real estate value and collateral channel. The general idea here is that lands are used as a collateral channel for debt financing. So the firms in an area owning lands in the general area might experience simultaneous fluctuations in their abilities to raise debt due to the variation in the land value. So the 2 ways to have shock to land values are natural disaster. This doesn't involve any firm-to-firm interaction. Another way is the firms in an area buying up more lands, which involve firm-to-firm interaction, which is the focus of our paper. So because this real estate values and collateral channel is essentially all about debt financing, so the authors further run a regression by regressing the debt issuance rates of firms on the average debt issuance rate of the previously mentioned 3 portfolios. So the result is presented as here. By looking at the first row, we can see that firms in the same industry tends to raise debt together. Even after controlling for the industry effects, like in column 3, we can see that the local peers which are in the different industry, their debt issuance rate still strongly predicts the debt issuance rates of firms in the same area. And also, same goes to the local peers which are in the same industry. They also have a positive and significant effect on the debt issuance rate. The fact that we find local movement in debt issuance rate in the first 6 columns suggests that at least part of the investment effect that we have investigated before might be caused by the common variation in the land values. So to further investigate this, the authors further subdivide the sample into unconstrained firms and constrained firms using the payout ratio and the Kaplan and Zingerl's index. So as we can see from the 7th column to 10th column, the only significant area effects are among those firms that are least financially constrained, which are in the column 9. So this suggests that common debt issuance is more likely to reflect common exposure to growth opportunities instead of common exposure to increased land value. So similar to the previous part where they run a investment Q and investment with the cash flow Q regression, they also run the same debt issuance on top of the cash flow and Q regression. So however, due to the fact that local movement in debt is weaker than the local movement in investment, so the authors find virtually nothing in these 2 tables. So for the last part, my friend will introduce it.
So hello everyone, and I will tell you the robustness test and the conclusion. So we come to the robustness test. The first one is large versus small firms. That means the authors divided the firms into 2 parts according to the median of the market value. So the small firms is below the median of the market value, and the large firm is above that. So also the authors have the 2 expectations. The first one is the collateral channel to be weaker for large firms. That means for large firms, they can invest more money than the small firms. And the second one is the large firms have less locally concentrated operation and sales. So we can go through the result. So as can be seen for the big firms investment, the coefficient is 0.229 with 2 stars on the right top kernel. And compared with the small firms, only 0.175 with 2 stars. It actually is bigger than the big firms is bigger than the small firms, maybe 30%. And the explanation is that executives of large firms simply have more opportunity to learn from and share ideas with other top managers and opinion leaders. And the second reason that CEOs of large firms may have information or valuable opinions about events that extend beyond their own firms. What's the meaning? So the first one, it means that for the large firms, the top managers, they actually play a more important role for society. Like they can take part in the charity fund or take the role in the community. So they have more opportunities to share ideas and communication with other people. And for the second idea, for the second reason is that like the big firms, for example, maybe you and I don't have the chance to contact with Trump, But for the Bill Gates and the Warren Buffett, they have the chance to meet the Trump maybe every day, maybe every week. So they have the information beyond their own firms. So that is an advantage for the large firms. But also you have a disadvantage for this such explanation because it fails to tell whether such effects represent the extent to actual information or rather result from the perception of information. And the second test is about do growing cities host growing firms? So we can find that they also find they have a strong coefficient between the population growth rate and the investment, about 0.392 with almost 3 stars. So they also divided the cities, I mean, you pay attention to cities, to 2 parts. The first one is the prosperous city, which means the city is thriving because they have the high growth, wage growth, and high population growth. And for that 2 columns, that kind of city have a significant coefficient with like the 0.2 and 0.169 is both statistically significant. And however, for the low wage growth city and the low population growth city, they actually have, for the low wage growth, they have the positive coefficient, but it's not statistically significant. And however, poorly for the low population growth, they are insignificant, but more need to pay attention that they have the negative coefficient. And so the question is that why should the firm's investment depend on city dynamics? And the second question is that why should the performance of other firms be more important when the city is growing? So the authors give some reasons. The first one is the population and or wage growth is a barometers for the quality of local human capital. That means for the city with a high wage growth and a high population growth, the capital pool is colorful because the city can provide the cheap and good quality human capital to the firms. So the firms prefer to invest in such a city. And the second reason is that the measurement error, because when you collect the information about the status of the city, like the faster growing rate of the population and wage, it also have, include some information about the healthy status by the firms. So actually, this, covariates have the correlation internals. And the last reading that favorable demographic trends like growing population are complementary investment prospects. That means some firms maybe have found a potential market for the city because they have a large population growth. So they maybe think there are more people have the ability to consumption, so they tend to invest more money in such cities. And the third test is about the headquarter changes. Actually, maybe this is a little complicated, but to put it in a simple way, actually there's an old saying in China, when the orange grows from the south side of the river, it will be the orange. However, by the orange, if it goes from the north side of the river, it will be the bitter mandarin. So that means maybe the local surrounding economic situations will have influence on the investment. So the authors divided the samples with the firms with 2 groups. The first column is column 8. They include all the sample cities. However, for the column 9, they just include all the cities which changed their headquarters once. Actually, we can find the result is that, the result is that because the small sample size, the coefficient with the different industry same area, its coefficient is positive, but however, it's not statistically significant. And the conclusion that, consistent with our hypothesis, we find that interactions are positive in all cases, but statistically insignificant, like due to the small number of location changes. Because for the sample of the firms which have changed their headquarters, maybe only occupied 3.5% of the total sample. And the next one is the clustering alternatives. And before I explain this test, I want to ask a question. What is clustering error? Maybe it's complicated. I can show you that. So this is a clustering error. It's a matrix. What the hell it is? Actually, the purpose I posted the picture on the slides, the only purpose is to scare you. So I hope you will not be scared by me, because I'm not going through the complicated statistic problems. I will put it in a simple way. I'll give you examples. Like you want to regress kids' grades on class size, but the unobservables of kids' belongings to the same classroom will be correlated, like the teacher's quality. Meaning that you want to find a correlation between the kids' grades and the class size. However, for the kids which study the same classrooms, they have the correlated because they are taught by the same teachers. So why not be correlated while the kids in faraway classrooms? So that is the key point of the clustering. So what's the meaning of statistics? Cluster standard error will increase with confidence intervals because you are allowing for correlation between observations. Hence, this starts on the tables. That means when you look at your statistical table, maybe on your right top corner, the stars will be less. The higher the clustering level, the larger the resulting standard errors. So maybe you can find that there's no difference between the coefficient because they are both statistically significant and the number is the same. But for the second row, like above the red line, the t-value actually decreased from the column 7 to the column 1 because for the column 1, it's the most conservative assumption. We assume that the data have the clustering during the industrial level. But luckily, they are both statistically significant, just the t-values decrease. And concluding that allowing for correlation in residues across industries, eras, as well as years is not particularly important. So for the last one, they do the robustness test about the varying industrial definitions. They also use the two methods about classifying the industry. The first one is the most classical one, the farmer-friendly industrial classification. And for the second one, I just want to explain the hotel-like product space. Actually, this method I think is pretty smart because they don't like to describe the form of the business. Actually, they go through to the 10K and the financial report, and they find the similar adjective words which used to describe their products. So maybe you are two different firms, but you use the same word to describe your products. So maybe there is a strong correlation between your products. So maybe they can include in the same industry. The result is that neither of these alternatives makes much of a difference, although the results strengthen slightly while the final industry classification. We can see the result. Actually, we can find the coefficient increase from the column 1 to the column 5 with a final classification of the industry. So the last one is just I mentioned that's new classification method. So for the conclusion, I just want to introduce that you can read above my red line. The earliest studies emphasize the physical attributes such as access to natural resources or transportation. But the more recent work explores the influence of location of human capital when the central idea is that a person's local environment has a first-order effect on his choice, like how much school he requires or which friends he spends time with. But actually, I think it's really interesting because I don't think it's a more recent work. There's a modern work because maybe you have listened about Confucius, but have heard about the Mencius, and he also the great educators and philosopher in China. Actually, the very famous story about his mother. Relocated their house for 3 times for the purpose of himself education. So actually, this story happened in the 300 BC. So it's not the recent work explores. So what's the conclusion? That about half of the pure industrial effect arises because of co-movement in the investment expenditures of local firms in different industries, where knowledge of trends should be much less relevant. Besides that, the author also provided a future potential research direction. The first one is how this human capital effects generate co-movements in local investment expenditure. So for this article, the start point of the author just to do the research about the correlation about in the same era, other firms with different industry maybe have an influence on the firms in its own self. So another direction, maybe we can do some research about the human capital effect. And the second one is will the success in one sector influences the work ethic in other sectors. And that's maybe maybe a little complicated according to a sentence, but to put it in a simple way, that means for the same area, two different industries, maybe one just like the content, maybe the content can sell very good, and however, maybe the boss of the baby formula milk powder, they envy the great sale of the content, so maybe they want to compete with each other to make sure which can make the best profit. Even though there is a competition, but the result is very good for the local economy because the whole economy, this area is promoted by such a competition. So we have finished our presentation. Any questions?
Guys have any questions? Okay, thank you very much, guys. Yeah. So I may have a few questions, but maybe just after the discussion. Yeah, you can go back. The discussion, the presentation of the discussion group. Again, I think like this, I don't know what you think, but to me, like this is a JF paper. So you can see that they address a lot of alternative explanation, right? So they try to put almost everything that people can think of, like to reject their main findings. So the main findings, they say something about there is an urban privacy, right? That drives the whole movement of the investment of every firms in the neighborhood. But there's many tons of different stories that can explain similar things, you know. Because what we actually show is just the correlation. We cannot really document the exact mechanism, like why we see the effect of why we see the cultural movement in the investment among the local firms. So that is why it's just a like implication of, like inference, right? So that is why they have to rule out a lot of alternative stories. I think in terms of the presentation, I think it just like became very clear until the very robust test that you guys show some kind of a map, right, of the main story and the different kinds of competing hypotheses or competing story, alternative stories. So to me that, I think the very first part, kind of the main idea, hasn't been conveyed clearly yet until I see the robustness test, that you guys and everybody beyond before, discussing, the alternative story. That because I think that the alternative story is actually the kind of very interesting part of the paper, right? Because in order to sell this story, they need to be able to refute or to control for other type of the story that can explain similar things, right? So I really like the parts that you present. I think it's actually, kind of deliver the main topic of the paper, and people can easily understand the practical. So that is why I think the way that you converted the wording that you read for the paper into the picture is very important. And I actually allocate 30% of the whole point for the presentation on the presentation slide. So the more effort that you convert the wording into picture, make it more illustrative, the more likely that you get full credit for the kind of slide in the picture. Yeah. So I might have a few, like questions for you guys, but maybe let's listen to our discussion group first to see how they're gonna discuss and do the critics of the paper. So you guys please come up and load up the slide for the presentation.
Okay, 要下了，哪里啊？在哪里啊？都一样。
Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. We are from Group 8. Before our discussion, I would like to make some brief announcement to you guys. Firstly, I really appreciate for your coming today, as I know many of you guys have a lot of heavy assignment due this week. So I know it's really uneasy for you guys to come. So actually today's attendance is not that bad. Okay, so also because of this, we made this prepared for this discussion in really such a hurry. So if we perform, we didn't perform very well as what you expect. So I have to say sorry, and I really beg for your forgiveness and understanding. Okay, I'm just joking. I just hope that the questions raised from you guys in the end won't be too tough. Okay. Anyway, just feel free to ask any question to us. Okay. Let's go back to the discussion. Okay, these are my group mates. Our structure of this discussion exactly follows the author's writing order. And firstly, I will discuss the title and the motivation and the contribution. And then Olaide and Xu Xuan will discuss the theory and the statistical model. And the next two girls, Liu Zhuzhu and Zhao Lingli, will talk something more interesting beyond this topic, which is the extension and scope. And lastly, our last group will give you a brief conclusion about what we just discussed before. Okay. Okay. Firstly, let's move on to my part. Okay. About the title, I have a question to you guys. When you guys firstly see this title, can you guys think of what do you guys think of or guess what this author is going to talk about? Actually, in my opinion, this title looks weird, as this author just put two nouns here, and without any relevant information about this. So, and especially for the word vibrancy, it looks really weird for me. Even I searched this word, the meaning of this word in the dictionary. It still doesn't make sense to me. And how is this word defined? What is the urban vibrancy? How is the word defined? And how is the corporate growth measured? Is questionable. But actually, it won't really matter. You just need to read the abstract or introduction. You will know everything. But I just need to find a point to say something. Okay. And next, another thing I need to mention is that such a short title, especially for academic paper, I think it's not that intuitive. It's not that clear to show what the idea of this paper is going to discuss. So that's my just a little bit complaint about this. I think that it just doesn't matter. And next, another thing I think is a little bit weird is the contribution, because when I saw the title such as my thought is I suppose this article will be illustrated in the economical basis, but when I read through the whole article, the author spent a lot of spaces to talk about the statistical stuff and the model significance towards the dependent variable, which is the corporate growth, right? So it's statistical intuitive, but I think it's make little contribution to the economical perspective because you also find a relationship between the urban vibrancy towards the corporate growth, but they also didn't explain the statistical outcome in a proper economical logical way. So I think it can hardly to say it's strong. It has a strongly contribution to the economic contribution. Okay, that's my part. And next, let's welcome my group mate Olaide to discuss the next part in more detail. Okay, thank you.
So we're going to look at theory over here. To make it simple, I'm going to speak about it very simply so you can understand it. So the idea here is that if we look at the investment Q regressions, our idea here is what we're trying to say is that cash flows and stock prices, or Q, are intrinsically linked together. So if you remember the Q calculation, Q equals the enterprise value. And I guess in a similar way, you can say enterprise value is another metric for measuring the value of a company, or stock price. So we'll proxy the name enterprise value, or Q, as stock price from here on. So if you look at what the author does, they have the regression model, which is investments equals lag stock prices of different industries, same area, or same industry, different area, and other combinations, and also the lag values of cash flows as well. And not just only that, they also have the lag value of companies, stock price, or the enterprise value, as well as the cash flows. The point we're trying to drive home here is that the authors, they assume that cash flows and stock price, or enterprise value, are not intrinsically linked together. They're independent of each other. And we know that when we're doing regressions, you can't have variables that are dependent in there. They have to be independent of each other to the dependent variable, which is investments. So just in case you didn't understand, the point I'm trying to drive home is that cash flow and Q, they're intrinsically linked together. They're dependent on each other, and you can't have that in regression. We're going to show some results just to show you some more. So we understand that, yes, there is a statistical significance across for both Q and cash flows, right across, even after each regression specification. But one thing we realize is that while there is a statistical significance, there has to be economic significance when you look at these variables together. There is economic significance for cash flow, but we question whether there's economic significance for adding Q, or enterprise value, or stock price. Even after they've put all the variables in and controlled for everything else, we still have statistical significance, but we question its economic significance. We look down at when we look at like different industry and same area. When they look at stock price, yes, we still agree that it's not even economic significant, but now we can even question whether it's statistically significant, because it's not even significant at the 1% or 5% level. It's only significant at the 10% level. So we are still questioning the fact whether it's necessary to add Q as an independent variable to determine whether investments changes. So if I go back, I'm making the point that cash flows and stock prices, or Q, they aren't, well, at least the authors, they make the fact that they aren't correlated. I think they're correlated. The reason I say that is we look at paper by Gordon and Shapiro. You might know them because they're the ones who created the dividend discount model. Their assumption is that if you take all the cash flows, which are dividends, it'll give you the stock price of a company, or it'll give you the value of a company. So if they're intrinsically linked together, that means they must be correlated. They might not be they might not be multicollinearity, because obviously stock prices are determined by other things other than cash flows, but they're strongly correlated. So we shouldn't have that in the model. Now the question is, what can we do? How can we replace the variable Q, or the factor? Well, if we look at a paper by Blunder LL 2015, it investigates how human capital could actually, human capital from schooling could actually replace stock price, or Q, as a factor. One of my group members will speak about that later in this presentation. The next point I want to make is about the R square, or the correlation or causality that we can infer from this, from the regression. We have the problem of omitted variable bias, and that comes in the form of industry classification. So the point here is that if you can't classify your industries correctly, and you have companies that are from different industries but have similarities with other industries, you start to get some correlation. And this is noted because the author even states it. He says, normally different, but actually the same industries could be inappropriately classified into different industries. So companies that are meant to be in the same industry, they could be easily classified into different industries, and you start to see correlation where it shouldn't be. So we question the local effects. And this might explain why we have a relatively low R-square. What is our solution? Well, we believe that we can use a more precise variable instead of the industry classification the author uses. We believe we can use SIC codes, which is standard industry codes, or some other academic papers, they like to use GICS, which is global industry codes, or global industry classifications. So both those codes, SIC and GSC, they're very common in academic literature. Since they better classify companies, because if you've ever seen SIC codes, they don't only have one level, they have 4 levels of classification. So the first level will look at maybe 8 or 9 industries, but once you get down to the lowest level, you have many, many different industry classifications, and therefore you're able to separate it greater. We believe that if we use SIC codes, we can improve the power and correlation, and therefore get a better causal relationship between investments and cash flows, or whatever the independent variable you want to use to define the dependent variable. So to sum it up much more simpler, we have the OVB problem of industry classification. Our idea is to introduce a new industry classification, which is SIC coding, and this will help us improve our causal relationship and understanding. I'll pass it on to my next member.
So just for how much low height for the R-square that you
I don't have it with me, but we believe that for a finance paper, it's relatively low compared to what we expect to see. So maybe I can show you after the lecture if you did want to see.
Yeah, I think that maybe we can help you guys remember.
Maybe if they have it, they can show you.
Thanks for our latest discussion about the serial part. Now let me introduce something about the modeling and research design. In this article, the authors use 2 models to describe the investment expenditure. The first model is here as the investment to investment regressions. As you can see from the slides, the left-hand side is the investment expenditure defined by the capital expenditure from the year T divided by the total asset from the previous year, T minus 1. And this symbol means the firms J operates in the industry I and the location A during the time T. The right-hand side is the controllable variables, including different factors. And the second model is the investment Q regressions. It looks more complicated. However, there are just a few adjustments. The authors use the cash flow and the lagged Q to improve the first model. Both models including the factors like firm's time period and the local effect. However, the problem is that do both models express the investment expenditure correctly? The answer would be no, because different industries have different demand for investments. For example, if we take pharma and the IT industry, they are heavily investment on R&D would not reflect in just 1 year. Their R&D will take a longer time to reflect on their total assets. Thus, we introduce the new methods to account for the investment expenditure. According to Peters and Tyler, we consider about the intangible capital. As you can see from the equation, we use the plant equipment, depreciation, inventory, and intangible assets, also R&D, to account for the investment expenditure. In my opinion, we recommend this method to account for the some industries using intangible assets more accurately. My part is over. Now, thanks for your listening. Now let's welcome Yu Zhu to talk something about the extension part.
Thank you. Next, I'm going to talk about the extension and scope of the paper. We divide this part into 3 topics. Endogenous factors, different industry characteristics, and finally expression way. The goal of this paper is to gauge the importance of endogenous factors on investment choice, but the authors talked a little about how these factors influence the expenditure. First, let's look at how human capital effects generate co-movements in local expenditures. The author states when deciding how much to invest in a given year, what a firm's local neighbors are doing is about half as important as what other firms in its industry are doing. Given that the half importance comes from the industry correlation, another half importance comes from the action of local neighbors' investment. Local neighbors' investment. Does the graduation city how do that could be explained by education, training, or systems such as Big Four accounting firms, consultants, or finance firms, where employees start and branch out to other firms in different industries. As for school, we look at the retention of graduates in schools where they graduated and then stayed back. Let's look at the breakdown of graduation. Graduates from 2012 and 2013 employed in each region after 6 months by migration categories. Here is incomer, returner, stay-year, lawyers. These three paths are the retention of graduates. To test the influence of graduation city, we can do a regression on these two variables. One is retention of graduates in schools where they graduated and then stayed back. The other variable is investment correlation of different industries in same area. Our sample is area 1, area 2, and area 3. If the correlation of these two variables is positive, so we can get a conclusion that the graduation city can affect the co-movement in local expenditure. In addition to the influence of employees on local expenditure, can shareholders influence the co-movement of local investment or the co-movement of investment in different areas? It's common that some shareholders, some people may be shareholders of several companies simultaneously. These overlapped shareholders have rights to vote for company's business. So the company's investment strategy may be influenced by these shareholders' education and their own way of analyzing and responding to investment. To test the influence of these overlapped shareholders, we can also do a regression on these two variables. One is the ratio of firms who have overlapped shareholders in their top 10 shareholders with other firms in the same industry and different areas. The other variable is the investments correlation of firms in same industry and different areas. The sample is industry 1, industry 2, industry 3, and so on. In terms of the shareholders' influence in different areas, we can change the variable of these two. The sample is area 1, area 2, and area 3. In addition, the shareholders may also have influence on stock price and the cash flow, because these overlapped shareholders may try to do some investment decision to maximize their own interests. Except the people-based influence, Lindy will introduce the influence of the industry characteristics. Juju has discussed some extension about endogenous factors, and next we're going to focus on different industry characteristics and expression way. Firstly, different industry has their own different characteristics and different pattern on daily operation. Let me refresh your memory. In this paper, we can see that they use cash flow as the X variable to predict investment level of each firm. But the question is, does every firm with large cash flow always spend more on investment than other firms? Not really, right? We give some example for international firms and the risky industry. Firstly, let me refresh your memory. You may get familiar with this picture, right? It's from past lecture notes. It surprised me before, so I put it again. And I want to show you guys that Apple holds so large of cash on hand. $246 billion is even greater than New Zealand GDP. So we have discussed before why Apple holds so much cash on hand, because due to some policy issue, if Apple wants to take the money back to US, and they have to pay lots of tax on it. So even though Apple has lots of cash, but they couldn't invest that cash on some capital investment and doing some investment. So Apple is a great example of international firms. And how about the risky industry? This is cash ratio of different industry in US. You can see that the top one, the light green one, is the information tech, and the bottom one, the dark green one, is energy firms. We can see that actually for the tech firms, it has almost 5 times larger ratio than the energy firms. So can we say that tech firms has lots of cash, higher cash ratio, so they will invest more money on investment, and energy lower ratio and they will invest less? No, the answer must be no. So with these two examples, we can see that the cash flow could not express the level of investment clearly. So we would recommend the paper to separate these industries. And then for the next special one is brand image focused industry. I believe everyone here must have heard about the Malaysia airline, right? I believe thousands of people won't take the airline anymore after accidents, including me, because I think it's really dangerous to take the airline. So we can say the airline industry really heavily rely on the brand image focus. So they will spend lots of money on brand image building rather than some capital investment. So if we use just capital investment, that number in the income statement, that number to represent the level of the investment, that's not really reliable. So we recommend the paper to separate the industry based on these two special characteristics. And next, we're gonna go to the expression way. You can see at the left, this is the regression model table I copied from the paper. I highlight these 3 groups, but why I do that? Because I need your help from you guys. I want you to find the same area and a different industry as quick as possible in this table. Okay, then how about different industry in the same area? I think someone already found the difference. Actually, these 2 sentences represent the same things, but just in different order. But the problem is, the first one would be harder for you to locate it in the table. That's the issue I always have when I'm reading the paper. When I want to check the number in the table, it's really difficult, right? But the problem is the paper always use the first one. It's not consistent. So we always be required neat and clear in our assignment and our paper. So we also hope this paper could do the same things. So we would recommend the paper can use the same words to represent the same things in the whole parts.
Okay, my part is about conclusion. Today our group talk about this paper from these 5 different parts. For the title, we think the author used the word vibrancy, but we think it's not very well because we didn't find any explanation or description of the vibrancy in the paper. So I don't think it's a good title. For the motivation and the contribution, we think the author provides a lot of statistics data and to prove the significance of this data. But the issue is we want to know about some economic reason. But the author did not also explain this too much about the economic reasons. And for the theory part, the author used the share price and the cash flow to explain to measure the investment. But we think the share price and the cash flow they have some correlations. Like we can use by the DDM, we can use the cash flow. So discount by the interest rate to calculate the cash flow, to calculate the share price. So we think if we can use human capital from schooling, could better replace the share price. And also the issue is that the R-square in the model is too low because the author uses the industrial classification. We think is the reason we occurs omitted variables. So we think, which means that the R-square too low means the independent variable not well explain the independent variable. Independent variable not explain well to the dependent variables. So if we think the author uses the more precise of industrial classification may improve the R-square. And also for the model and the research part, and the two models that used in this paper, we think is not well explain the industrial investment by the local firm. So our group member provide another equation, another formula, so better to explain the investment. And for the extension, our group talked about two endogenous issues. One is the human capital, and another one is the shareholder. We think these two factors may have some co-movement to the local investment. So, and also we talk about the different investment. Also think about that different firms will have different features, like some international firms like the Apple or something. They also should be considered in these articles. And also about the expression, like the author used to the expression of the variables are not constant in this paper. So when we read the paper, we may feel confused. Okay, so thank you for watching. And if there anyone has any question, feel free to ask.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. So I understand that. I think the discussion group today, especially this week, got actually a very challenging job. So because I think the papers, I think the papers, as I know, that has been presented in many conferences. So that is why I think that they try to address stuff already, and not much room left. To actually add any kind of critics. So there are some good points that you guys raised, and I think some of them very innovative. I think for me, I didn't even think of that. For example, I think the first thing is the labor. I also think that is something that if we do a extension, then it's going to be good to provide some kind of real evidence about a labor mechanism. Right? So what they are doing is that they try to rule out all of the alternative mechanism, and they say that the leftover is more likely is about the labor or social interaction in urban privacy, right? So I think the group actually presents, I think it's very specific. So I actually like something like this in the weekly critics. So if you say something that the paper doesn't really provide very solid or very clear or direct evidence about a labor mechanism, then you should, suggest or recommend a way how to actually can provide evidence about a labor, channel, So I think you provide something about radiation rate, right, in the logo. So that's really good point. And the things that innovative to me, and I didn't think of that, and there is empirical evidence on that part, is that, the movement in investment among firms in the neighborhood can be coming from overlapping shareholders, So there's some kind of, they say the interlink of shareholders, So there's empirical evidence saying that the interlink of shareholders affects like corporate fraud commission, right? So if there is a fraud in one company and if there is some interlink of shareholders or board, right, directors, then you may see the fraud commission transmitted to another company. So it's kind of a spillover effect through the overlapping board, So I think it's something really good, I didn't even think of that. So that's a really good point. And I think like you guys suggest something about the other type of investment, so I agree. I think they look at more of capital structure, and then we understand that the US economy now is transformed to more service-oriented economy. Then maybe the real capital expenditure, like property, plant, and equipment, is no longer a major part, right, of their business. So they may invest in intangible assets and stuff like that, and maybe spending. Looking at the investment in terms of other type of investment might work. So there are many, and I think like I value that in the sense that they already address a lot of good things, right? And you guys will be able to find something that they can they can kind of extend the analysis. That's really good. I'm not really sure about the title. To me, the title is kind of illustrative enough. So it gives us some kind of a sense that, of course, I mean, then there's always a trade-off, right? So if you want to be very specific, then there's going to be something that it sounds like people don't really feel curious of what the paper is about, So you kind of need to kind of balance that, right? I think that the papers are normally very eye-catching or attention-catching is that they normally frame it in a term that may reflect the spirit, right, or the main message of the paper. So the main message of the paper is truly about what they say is the urban privacy. I mean, it's like the social interaction that make some urban areas more vibrant, right? So so I think in terms of the title, of course, I understand that you under pressure to find something to say, right? For example, last week, I think the paper is totally the title. I agree that it's two-way bigger than what they're just saying about the gap feelings, right? They're talking about just general determinants. But here, I think the main message here is about the urban privacy. It's about what they say. I think some story that people keep talking about, the social interaction in the urban areas, right? And this generates spillover, it generates another spillover effect. So I kind of, thinking that it captures some kind of the main message in there. So, but yeah, you're not going to be penalized, for those type of comments. It's just like I provide you some feedback, just for discussion. Yeah, and I just want to ask you whether you understand the difference between the industry classification like SIC and Farmer French. So they use Farmer French, right, in the paper. So what is the difference between SIC and Farmer French? Which one is better? Do you know? You got an idea? Yeah.
I wouldn't know which one's much better, but I think the SIC and GIC, they're more standardly used around the world. People tend to adopt them more. I'm not sure if it's technically better, but
yeah. I think like now, especially in economics, they no longer use SAC. They use the NAI. So there's a lot of this weaknesses, or I mean, this kind of a drawbacks of SIC classification in the sense that SIC classification based on the final product, and they don't consider the production process. So that is why the Farmer French, even though they got fewer industry classification, but I think one of the main advantage, or people sometimes have to use it, depending on how they justify it, is the way that it looks at the whole production process. For example, for SIC, they're gonna classify the tire the manufacturer of a Thai product of a car is not in the car manufacturing. So I think that the pharma industry is going to consider every not byproduct, but it's kind of a spare part or anything relating to a final product. They classify in the same industry, so they consider some kind of the concept of supply chain rather than the final product than SIC. So that is the reason why I think SIC suffer a lot of criticism in the sense that you may look at two different industries, but they are totally related. Because this industry is a part of the supply chain of another industry, So that is why in terms of the industry point, I'm not really sure, it's going to be much better to move from pharma French to the SIC. So the pharma French, because the reason if they use the 49 industry classification, then I think in terms of econometric, it's actually more robust if you consider 100 industry, right? Because in that sense, you're going to consider they are different, right? But if you group them in 49, that means like you actually tighten the analysis, because you still consider that they are the same industry, and you only consider that non-industry same location, right? To actually measure the privacy. Yeah.
I was going to say I think that's one of the things that make it very difficult to actually go through and critically analyze this table, is the fact that we don't have any of the data or any of the specifics that were used, because even if we wanted to say that this would improve that, we couldn't really say it unless we got the data, regressed it, and then see if this was actually true. We only had to guess.
Yeah, but I mean at least, I think if you think that the industry classification has some kind of problem, then you must search why SEC has a problem, right? Or if they use pharma and French, then so raise a question, then do some kind of Google search to see what's the problem, or what is the kind of a strong point of pharma and French, relative to compared to the SIC. Yeah, but again, I mean this is actually a discussion, so for you guys to understand a few more things, So I think it's good that you raise it up, so then I can have a point to discuss with you about this, so then you can know more, right? So maybe not many of you understand the difference between pharma French and SIC. So for example, in Detroit, right? So the way that if they use the pharma French to classify the related industry, then they're gonna all of everything about Thai, everything spare parts that are components of the car, right? It's gonna be considered in the same industry. But if in the SIC, they're gonna be in a different industry, okay? Because they are just a totally different product. Okay, so in terms of the presentation group, I mean you guys, I think it's not I'm not saying it's a bad presentation, but I think there's might be some room to improve, right? So I think the very first few slides is very important to kind of catch the attention that what you're talking about, So I think your slide should be kind of very first slide, and then you're gonna see the whole structure is that, I think the whole structure that they say is, first thing is they show the correlation, right? And then they try to rule out all of alternative story, so it's kind of, the main structure of your presentation should be followed in that way. But I think it need to be very on the top, right? So just people kind of aware, and I think the way that you put things together in a box like this, I think is a very intuitive to, very easy to understand. And so the reason why they actually consider only I think why they have to exclude the industry when they consider the location factor. Yeah, you mean I think in general, right? So they say something like, so they got many variables, right? So they got variables for the investment or the cash flow of same industry, same location, and then different location, same industry. So what kind of the purpose of that, of doing that?
Is that you always expect that firms in the same industry they have correlation in their investment.
Yeah.
So the paper want to investigate the firms that are not in the same industry but in the same area as the firms. Do they affect the
investment of that firm. So if we can find like a correlation between the investment of firms that are not in the same industry but in the same area, so that leads to the urban vibrancy explanation. Right?
Yeah.
Because we normally just expect firms in the same industry to invest together or issue debt together. But the paper find explanation that why firms that are not in the same industry but the same area, their investment rate also affects the investment rate of the firms.
Yeah. So I think the kind of the test that they did is actually try to address that the U.S., the industry clustering in the U.S. is very strong, right? So if you got a quite diversified neighborhood, you might not need to actually, that's not really a big concern. But so the concern here is that you're gonna see a lot of related firms in the same industry or in the same supply chain, right, locate together, right? So that is the reason why if you see the co-movement of all the local firms, it may not reflect the local effect, but it may reflect the industry effect, right? So I think the very first is that I think the key message or the key challenge of the paper is distinguish between the local effect and the industry effect, right? So their message is like they want to say about the local effect. But because the industry clustering locally, right? So that is why they have to exclude the industry effect, as one of the, it's one of in the baseline analysis. Okay. Yeah, okay, that's pretty good. So we don't have much time left, or we're going to continue with the capital investment topic for today. So I think I'm going to go over kind of the main intuition that we can learn from the two papers that we're going to discuss. It's about the private firms. Okay, so I think last week, or not last week, I think Monday, right? So we talked about the capital investment of two different industries, right? Remember? So the industry in the hotel, and then a hospital, right? Yeah, the hospital. So there's a kind of healthcare. So and I think because the very standard type of the industry, I think we already learned, right? So that's why I picked the papers that kind of give you a different angles, so then you can learn a little more about like non-traditional type of industry. So this one is going to be about, these two papers more, related to private firms. So there are not many studies about private firms, right? The reason is we don't have information, right? So I think this is one of the, I think it's also very top finance journal. They be able to access data for the private firms. So that's why they can shed light on some kind of interesting stuff on the private firms. Okay, so this paper is kind of talking about kind of a very big picture, So what they say is that how does the public market interrelated with the private market? So what do you think? So what do you think about, the mechanism or the benefit of having a public sector, right? Like listing factor, like listed firm in the same industry, from the point of the private firms. So does it matter? If I'm a private firm, why do I care whether those industry got many big guys, that are currently listed? Sorry?
Like the public firm mostly is the large firm in
Yeah.
the industry.
Mhm.
So maybe what they do maybe is reflect maybe the customer's preference, something like that. So they need to catch up. If they didn't catch up the public firm or the large firm, so maybe they don't survive later.
Yeah, so I think very good point. So one of the things that the private firms gonna care, right? The presence of the public firm, the first thing is gonna be competition story, right? So as you said, so the competition story is gonna, if they kind of provide a product or service that public firms also are doing, right? Offering, then they gonna, it's gonna factor into their competition strategy. What else?
If the big firm is really in a dominant position, they probably will merge and acquisition as well.
Yeah, very good. So there probably can be something about merger and acquisition, right? So if you got more public firms, then private firms actually can see it's a good signal in the sense that, you know, it can be they can be a target later on, right? And it's always profitable to be a target for a public firm, right? Because they're gonna buy out at a very good price. Very good. What else? What other things? So they also can be a very good future example of if they want to go IPO, right? So they can have some kind of a comparable firm to see like the prospect or the I think kind of the potential, right? When they get listed, right? So I think it's also a benefit. So I think in this paper they try to address something else, you know. But at least those brainstorming is good for us in the sense that we can criticize this paper if they don't address that all of the things that we are talking now, right? So I think the idea that here they say is about the information environment. Okay? So what they're saying that if in an industry, if there is a significant part of a public firms, right, then the information environment is very good. Why? That means like the investor is gonna understand more about the industry, understand the difficulty, understand the potential, the prospect of those industry, if there are many public firms in the industry. Yeah. Right? Because the public firm, they disclose information, right? They are not only disclose information, but they also have something kind of management guidance. They got a conference call, you know. So there are many channels that the public firm can talk about the industry prospect, right? And then from there, the investor are gonna understand more, and that's the reason why that the private firm can enjoy that, you know, can enjoy the way that investor is gonna be, you know, more aware of what is going on, you know, so they probably more willing to invest, you know, in that industry. So I think they it's kind of they circulate around the information environment. Okay, so what they're trying to show is that you know, the composition of the public in the industry is gonna have a significant impact on the information environment of the industry. And that is the reason why that the private firm investment is going to be more sensitive to investment opportunity. Okay? So these are the main hypotheses. So the hypothesis here is that the disclosure activities can improve the information environment for firms within the industry by reducing the uncertainty about the demand, supply, or cost condition, as these factors are interrelated within an industry. Okay, and how they gonna test it, you know? So they gonna test. Let me see. Maybe this is we got one more paper to go. So the way that they test is that they want to see the investment. You know, this is the investment. So it's a Y variable. So they measure the sensitivity of the investment to the sales growth. So what the sales growth actually proxy for? So they proxy for the future, right? They proxy for the future investment opportunity, you know? So the thing is that so this one is actually measure the sensitivity of investment to the sales growth. You know, if you got a higher coefficient, that means like, you know, higher sales growth, you're more likely to invest, you know? But if you got a smaller magnitude, that means like it's less sensitive to the sales growth. You know, if sales growth increase by 1%, then you know your investment increase less than 1%, something like this. You know, so it's actually similar, like I think the paper that we just discussed is about investment sensitivity. So this is a similar thing. So they interact here. So what does that mean? That means like they want to ask how the public proportion in the industry affect the sensitivity of investment towards investment towards the investment opportunities, right? You know, and then you can see it's positive here. So what they say is that if in the industry there's a significant number of public firms, the information environment is going to be better, and that is the reason why the private firm can invest more confidently when they see a significant positive side of sales growth. Okay, so it's kind of the main findings of the paper. And I think we can look at some statistics here. You know, so this is a startup in the US, so I'm not sure, you know, it can be interesting to see, you know, the similar data in China or any other countries, like very big countries. So in the US, you can see that this industry, you know, is very significant proportion of public firms, you know, of firms are public, you know, so most of them list in this industry, like mining, information, manufacturing. But you don't see much, for example, like those industry, like construction, wholesale, healthcare, or art, entertainment, educational service, right? Can you give me some reason why we don't see significant here?
Because compared to the with the big proportion, they are more like fundamental daily life next.
Yeah.
For the education and art is like intangible.
Yeah.
And it's more than the basic life. It's like they have more pursuits, so they would be diversified. They can have more choices from different firms rather than just simple basic life.
Okay. So you mean like, so why industry in this firm in this industry not interested in going public, right? Because the proportion is very small. Because you think like
this kind of industry, they need innovation and they need like different kind of firms and have more choices for their customer. They don't need to unify, but like gas and household information retailers, people can just choose the same things, so they satisfy themselves with the same owner.
Okay. Yeah. So how about you? What do you think?
The industry, you know, they are a very mature industry, and they usually doesn't need to provide that much external funding.
Yeah. That's a good point. So external funding can be a reason. Probably maybe the size of this industry, the firm, right, may not that large, right? For example, educational services or art, entertainment, right? And if the size are not large, then they might not need a lot of capital, right? Because the first benefit for going public is getting capital, right? Cheap capital, right? And if they don't have interest in that, then you know there is no kind of incentive, right, to list.
So why they
But sorry?
why the size of these industries are small?
Yeah, you can see you don't really see any really large, because I think it's not really capital intensive either. Yeah, very good question.
I think the last part, that those industry is kind of like less competitive compared to the
these
industry above, like the retail and is really competitive. So maybe they need more public firm.
Yeah. Yeah, competition can be a factor, right? And maybe what you're saying can be something about customer perception. Yeah, maybe like that, right? Maybe if you use one word, it's got a customer perception. That means like they might need to public to get recognition for their brand, right? And I think for those type of industry isn't that high demand for this, right? So the problem, yeah, that is true, right? So we're talking all about the benefit of being listed, right? Okay, and then look at this. So this is some statistic for private firms like ROA, cash leverage. You can see the leverage is very high, right? It's 53%. I don't know, you remember some other study that we talk about. I think for public firm it's about 30-something%, right? Or 27, right? It's around 30%. But here we observe very significant leverage. Asset size is very small, right? So we observe normally it's like 4. This is a lot of asset. That ROA is 13% is pretty good. It's not like because I think like as it depends, but I think like for private firms, because of a small size, right? So you always see the return on asset is normally higher than it's a bigger size, right? So it means similar like if you run a small business, you always earn very high rate, right? But if you run a large business, the rate is very small, but the absolute amounts can be large. Yes, this is the win key. I think the self growth in the private firm is 14%. Is very impressive, right? 14% per year is very impressive. Okay. Yeah, and one way to, I'm not sure whether you understand with kind of the instrument. I think like when you read papers, there's gonna be a lot of discussion about the instrument and stuff like that. Are you familiar with the instrument concept? No, not yet. Maybe I can explain it a little for you, right? Maybe day by day, hopefully the end of the semester, you're gonna get the idea of the instrument test. So this is one of the tests that they try to address. I think it's very interesting. So they want to see like whether is it about public proportion, like public percentage, right, in an industry matters or not. So they try to use to measure the investment opportunity using changes in the state of corporate income tax. Okay, so because this is a corporate income tax, it's only affect firms that in a corporation, in a certain type of corporation, right? And this is the guys who are not subject to the changes in corporate income tax. Okay, and then you can see that so they replace instead of the sales growth, right? They use tax change, and then you can see that it's only the guys who actually affected by the tax change, right, have an effect, a significant effect. But if they don't, subject to the tax change, you don't really see the effect. Okay, so let's move to the IV. Maybe I can explain on the table for the IV. We don't have many left, so I'm gonna go to the IV part. Okay, so what does it mean by the IV? Okay, so let me give you an example of IV. Okay, so we got an X, right? So normally our research question is, we got an Y here, sorry. And then we got our variable of interest. So this is our interest. Okay? And then of course, we're gonna have some control variable. Okay, so the endogeneity problem that we keep talking about is this. Is that what we show, let's say we show on the coefficient, let's say alpha, right? So we show the coefficient here and we show that it's significant. Then for example, if alpha is positive, then we say that X drives E, right? So this is what we try to claim, right? So we try to claim that X actually drives Y. Let's say CEO tenor, right? CO tenor is gonna drive, let's say, CO compensation. Okay? But the argument can be something like something else here, right? Something else here, let's say a variable A, right? So the variable A here, that we don't control in here, can drive both X and Y, And this is not because X drive Y, but because somebody else, right, something else drive both of this. And that is why we observe these guys move together, So how to address this type of problem, right? So they're going to argue, no, I don't think this guy drive this, but something else drive both of that, okay? And one way people often say is that we're going to use IV. So what does it mean by IV? So the way that IV actually can help is that they're going to find a variable, right, that is related to X. That means that it can drive X, but not directly related to Y. You see what I mean? Maybe I can give you an example of that. I have to think of some examples so then you can visualize it easier. Let me remember. Yeah, I think I remember there is a paper looking at how performance, I guess, how like the ski resort, right? So they look at the ski resort and they want to see like how the performance of the ski resort is gonna affect the capital leverage. Okay, for example, if they observe that the fluctuation of the weather, it's just too risky that they're gonna reduce that. So that totally makes sense, right? So the way that they try to do is they're gonna get a variable that unrelated to maybe whether I remember correctly. So they try to get a variable is like a shock in weather, right? That related to X but not related to Y. Then what they're gonna do is like they're gonna run a regression of X, the IV on X. Okay? And they're gonna get this is the component epsilon. Okay? So if they run a regression of Y on X and they're gonna get the the predicted or the residual of the predicted X. Okay, so I'm gonna run like this, and from there I'm gonna get the predicted X. Right? So this predicted X is actually explained by IV. You see what I mean? Because I think the movement of X can be because of the IV, can be because of 100 other factors, right? So when I run this regression, then I'm gonna get the predicted X. The predicted X here is just the component that just explained by IV only, but not other factors. Okay? And they're gonna use the predicted X here, put into here, and then run a regression again. And if they can still see a coefficient here, then that means that it's actually less likely to be affected by something else. Mm-hmm. Can you see kind of the concept? Yeah.
So the IV is related to Y or not?
No. So I think it's a very good question. It's kind of very tricky because what we mean is that the IV can relate it closely to X, but not kind of. It can, of course, it's gonna have an effect finally on Y, but it's not a direct effect. It needs to be a effect through the X. Okay. So for example, if I say, I remember. So I think I got it wrong in the sense. I think they got here is here is the performance. Okay, so they got the performance of the ski resort, and I think they look at the effect of the performance on something else, which I could remember. So they use a weather of shock, and then of course you can see that the weather of shock is gonna affect the performance of the ski resort, right? But there is no direct effect on the variable Y here, Then if you use that IV and get the predicted value of this, then the component of X here is totally explained by this only, right? Not by something else, Because this something else here is your concern. Okay, so the A here is belong to here, right? So the A here is saying that A can be a factor explain X, right? And then A only a factor to explain Y. So this is your main concern, right? So then what you say is that no, because I'm going to take the proportion of X that just explained by something that really exogenous. So normally people use something like weather, some kind of hurricane or terrorist attack, It's something like very, you cannot claim, it's just out of the blue. Like you cannot really claim that it is caused by something about Y, Then in that sense, you can get a proportion of X that kind of exogenous, right? And then if it's exogenous and you run this, and it still explains Y, then this coefficient here is less likely be endogenous. This is kind of the concept.